Okay, so you guys have sent over a bunch of really interesting stuff this time around, all about intention setting and journaling. And I know we've talked about this before, but I'm excited to dig into it even more.
It's fascinating stuff, right?
Yeah. So I guess what we're going to be looking at specifically this time is how using a journal the right way can really make a difference when it comes to actually making those intentions happen and, growing as a person. And like we've talked about before with Listallian journals, it seems like there are some really intentional design choices there that make that process easier.
For sure, and we'll definitely get into those specifics. But I think the big picture here is that connection between like what you're thinking, what you're feeling, and what you're actually doing in the world.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, when I think about it, journaling with intention really is like trying to bring all those things together. Your thoughts, your emotions, even your actions. It's not just, random thoughts in a diary.
Right. And I think that's where the power of actually writing those goals down comes in. It's almost like you're creating a visual roadmap for yourself. When you see those intentions in front of you in black and white, they become way more real. And that's huge for staying motivated.
Definitely. I can totally relate to that.
Yeah.
Like for me, I know if I just think about wanting to learn a new skill or something, it's not the same as actually like scheduling practice time in my calendar, writing it down, somehow makes it feel so much more like a real commitment.
Absolutely. And it's not just about like big goals either. One of the things that really stood out to me in the stuff you sent was how like this daily practice of writing down intentions can help you stay focused on your priorities even when life gets super crazy.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, there's always so much going on. It's easy to get sidetracked.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that happens to me all the time.
Yeah, and when you're constantly checking in with yourself in that journal, it gives you a chance to kind of step back and be like, okay, what's actually important here?
Mm.
What am I working towards? It's almost like decluttering your mind.
Right. It's like creating space for those intentions to actually grow.
And something else that's really interesting about this whole thing is the impact it can have on like your emotional intelligence and self-awareness. You're constantly reflecting on your motivations and figuring out what might be holding you back.
So speaking of Listallian journals, we've talked about them before, but I remember one thing that always stuck out to me was the dashed lines on the pages.
Mm-hmm.
What is it about that particular design choice that makes it so helpful for intention setting?
It's funny how something as simple as like a dashed line can make such a difference. But I think it's about creating a structure without being too rigid. Some people might want to use those lines to break down their intentions into smaller steps or maybe even incorporate visuals like little diagrams or lists. And the dashed lines kind of act as a guide without feeling too restrictive.
I totally get that. I remember when I was planning a trip a while back, it was pretty complicated, and I had like a million things swirling around in my head, places I wanted to go, things I wanted to do, and it just felt so chaotic. And I started using this notebook that had a dot grid pattern. It was similar to dashed lines in that it provided a subtle structure. And honestly, it was amazing how much that helped me, like just visually mapping out my itinerary, connecting different parts of the trip, even making lists of things I needed to pack. It felt like those little dots were helping me get all that mental clutter out of my head and onto the page.
Exactly. And that feeling of being overwhelmed is something that comes up a lot with journaling.
Yeah.
People start out super excited, but then life gets in the way, and it's easy to lose that initial motivation,
Yeah.
especially if you're not really sure where to start or your goals feel too big.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
It's like that initial burst of energy is easy to come by, but then it's like, how do you keep going when things get tough?
That's where having a well-designed journal can really make a difference. And this is something we've talked about with Listallian journals. The features like numbered pages and that built-in table of contents, they might seem small, but they can be so powerful for helping you stick with it.
Yeah, how so?
Well, the numbered pages, they create this sense of like progress and order, like you're actually moving forward. And then that table of contents makes it so easy to go back and find things. If you're feeling lost or discouraged,
Hmm.
you can flip back through and see how far you've come and reconnect with those early intentions. It's super helpful.
Oh, I see. It's kind of like having an index to your own thoughts and intentions.
Exactly. It gives you a sense of continuity, like you're building on something. And I had this friend, she was trying to launch this side project while still working her full-time job, and she was just all over the place with it. She felt so scattered. And then she started using a journal that had a table of contents, and she started organizing her entries by different aspects of the project, like marketing ideas, development tasks, networking contacts, and she'd log them in the table of contents. And over time, she could actually see the project taking shape. She could track her progress in different areas and figure out where she needed to focus her energy.
Hmm.
It went from this huge, overwhelming thing to something manageable.
Wow, that's a great example of how the journal itself becomes like a tool for you to use.
Right. And speaking of tools, another thing we've talked about is using prompts to make journaling easier. And I know the material you shared talks a lot about this too.
Yeah, I was definitely intrigued by that. So, how exactly do prompts help you with intention setting?
Well, sometimes the hardest part is just knowing where to start. You sit down with your journal and you're like, okay, now what? And prompts can be really helpful for that. They give you a direction to go in like specific questions to think about.
What are some examples of prompts that people could use?
Oh, there are so many great ones out there. Like one I really like is, what is one thing I want to focus on today? Or how can I better align my actions with my core values? Stuff like that can really help you zero in on what's important and come up with actionable insights.
So, with Lestalian journals, we've talked about the wood-free ivory-colored paper. How does that tie in with intention setting?
It's not just about looks. The feel of the paper can actually make a big difference when you're writing. That wood-free ivory paper, it's so much smoother,
Huh.
which makes writing a lot more enjoyable, and it's less likely to bleed through, which means you can really focus on your thoughts without getting distracted.
It's all about creating that sense of calm and focus, right?
Exactly. And the less friction there is in the actual act of journaling, the more likely you are to stick with it.
Which is super important.
Yeah.
And speaking of sticking with it, the material also talked about how journaling can actually help you build resilience and start seeing challenges as opportunities to learn.
I love that idea. It's so easy to get caught up in the negative stuff, but when you're journaling regularly, you start to see those tough times in a different light. You can reflect on them, figure out what you learned, and use those experiences to grow.
And that reminds me of Sarah, this marketing professional I know, who was telling me how journaling completely changed her outlook. She was feeling so overwhelmed with work, she didn't know where to begin. She was having trouble even figuring out what her goals were.
Yeah, that's so common. It can be really hard to articulate those intentions at first, especially when you're feeling stressed.
Exactly. So she started really small, just tiny daily intentions like, I will take a 15-minute break away from my screen today, or I will really listen to my colleague during our next meeting, things like that. And she told me that just the act of holding her Lestalian journal, that soft faux leather cover, actually became something she looked forward to, like a little moment of peace in her crazy day.
It's so interesting how those little details can make such a difference. It becomes more than just a chore. It's like a little ritual, a way to take care of yourself.
Totally. And she started using the back pocket of the journal to keep little inspirational notes or quotes she'd come across. It was like she was creating this whole support system for herself.
It's like building a little world in that journal.
Yeah. And what's really cool is that over time, her journal became way more than just a place to write things down. It became like this tool for self-discovery, you know? By writing down her intentions and reflecting on her progress, she started to see her whole mindset shifting. She became more confident, way more clear about what she wanted. And those challenges that used to feel so overwhelming, they started to feel manageable.
I love that. It's a perfect example of how powerful even small changes can be when you're consistent.
So let's say someone is listening to this and they're like, okay, this sounds awesome. I want to try intention journaling. What are some practical tips they can start using right away? And how do features like the words we've talked about in the Stallion journals really support those tips?
Great question. I think the most important thing is to start small. You don't need to come up with these huge life-altering intentions right off the bat. Just one simple intention for the day. Something like, I will be fully present during my next conversation. That's a great place to start. And then as you get more comfortable, you can gradually expand.
That makes sense. Baby steps, right?
Exactly. And those guided prompts we talked about can be super helpful too, especially at the beginning when you're not sure what to write. Something like, what is my main priority for today? Or what small step can I take towards a longer term goal? Those can really help you focus your journaling sessions. And the wide lines in a Lestalian journal give you plenty of space to write comfortably without feeling cramped.
I've noticed that, yeah, they're like the perfect width.
Another technique that can be really powerful is visualization. So, like when you're setting an intention, actually taking a minute to imagine what it would feel like to achieve that goal. Maybe even jot down some descriptive words or a quick sketch. It just makes it more real in your mind. And the spacing in Lestalian journals is great for that kind of thing. You can add those little visuals without making the page feel cluttered.
And what about reviewing your entries regularly? I know that's something the material emphasized.
Oh, that's so important. It's not just about writing, it's about going back and learning from what you've written. Taking some time each week to reread your entries and see what patterns are emerging, what strategies are working for you, and where you might need to adjust. And those numbered pages and the table of contents in a Listalian journal make that so much easier. You can quickly find what you're looking for and track your progress over time.
And lastly, creating a ritual around your journaling can really help you stick with it.
Absolutely. If you can connect it to something you already do regularly, like having your morning coffee or taking a few minutes to relax before bed, it becomes less of a chore and more of something you look forward to. And the physical experience of using a nice journal, the smooth paper, the feel of the cover, that can all become part of the ritual.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so now let's talk about the emotional side of things. The material talked a lot about how journaling helps with emotional resilience.
Yeah.
Can you explain what that means?
So, resilience is basically your ability to bounce back from tough times, and journaling can help you build that skill because it gives you a way to process those difficult emotions. When you write about how you're feeling, it helps you make sense of what's going on in your head and gain some clarity. And over time, you start to see patterns in your emotional responses, which means you can start developing healthier ways to cope.
So the journal becomes like a safe space to work through those feelings.
Exactly. And having a durable journal with plenty of pages like the Listalian with its 211 pages of that thick 120 GSM paper, that means you can really explore those emotions without feeling limited. And that cover, it's soft, but it's also really strong. So,
Yeah.
it can handle being used every day.
It becomes like a trusted companion.
Hmm.
So speaking of tough times, the material also talked about how journaling can actually help you turn challenges into opportunities for growth. How does that work?
I think it's about using the journal as a tool to really think through problems. You know, when you're facing a setback, you can write down all the details, what happened, how you felt about it, what factors might have contributed, and then you can actually use the journal to brainstorm solutions.
So it's like having a brainstorming session with yourself.
Exactly. And the dash line pages in a Listalian journal, those can be super helpful for that. You
Okay.
can make lists, map out ideas, visually even create timelines to see the sequence of events that led up to the challenge. It's all about taking that step back and seeing things from a more objective perspective.
That's such a powerful way to approach challenges. Okay, so now let's dive into some of the science behind all this. The material mentioned the Reticular Activating System, or RAS. What is that, and how does it relate to intention setting?
Okay, so the RAS, it's basically this network in your brain that acts as a filter for all the information that's constantly bombarding you. It's like a gatekeeper deciding what gets your attention and what doesn't. And the cool thing is that your RAS, it prioritizes information that aligns with your current focus, your interests, and your intentions.
So when you set clear intentions, you're basically telling your RAS what to look out for.
Exactly. And when you write those intentions down, you're making them even more concrete for your brain. And that's where features like the numbered pages and the table of contents in Listalian journals come in handy again, because they help you keep those intentions organized and make it easy to revisit them regularly, which keeps reminding your RAS what's important, so you're more likely to notice opportunities or resources that align with your goals.
It's like you're training your brain to see what you want to see.
Exactly. Okay, so now let's talk about some of the common roadblocks people hit when they're trying to journal. Things like not knowing what to write or feeling like they don't have enough time.
Yeah, those are definitely things I've struggled with.
For sure. So if you're struggling with that, I don't know what to write, feeling guided prompts can be a total lifesaver. Something simple like, what am I grateful for today? Or what is one small act of kindness I can offer? And when it comes to time, the key is to start small. Even just 5 or 10 minutes a day can make a big difference. And the Listalian journal, it's small and light enough that you can easily take it with you so you can write whenever you have a few minutes.
I love that it's so portable.
And if you're having trouble staying consistent, try linking your journaling to an existing habit. Like maybe you always have a cup of tea in the morning. Try journaling while you drink your tea. It just makes it easier to stick with it. And remember, your journal can be a safe space to process anything that's going on in your life if you're feeling overwhelmed or stressed. Just writing it down can help. And don't forget to celebrate those small wins. Writing about things you're grateful for can make a huge difference in your outlook.
The material also mentioned choosing a journal that you actually like and that feels good to use.
That's a great point. You want a journal that inspires you and that has features that you'll actually use, like that smooth paper in the Listalian.
So pick a journal that speaks to you.
Yes. And set aside some time each day, even if it's just a few minutes. Start with one small intention or a guided prompt, and then go back and review your entries every week. Those are some really key steps to building a sustainable habit.
Okay, so finally, let's talk about the long-term benefits of all this.
Yeah.
The material suggested some pretty amazing outcomes.
Yeah, for real. I mean, over time, intention journaling can lead to some serious personal growth. You start
Hmm.
to get really clear on what you want in life. You're able to focus your energy. You become more resilient in the face of challenges, and you just feel more empowered overall.
That's incredible. And a journal like the Listallion, with those special features like the back pocket for keeping mementos and those comfortably spaced lines, it really seems like it's designed to support that journey.
It reminds me of my grandfather. He always kept this daily logbook for years and years. And looking back at it now, it's so cool to see how that simple act of writing things down every day really shaped his life. It reflected his values. And even though it wasn't like a grand master plan, that consistent practice had a huge impact on who he became.
I love that story. It shows that you don't have to have it all figured out to benefit from journaling. Just the act of reflecting and recording can be so powerful. And when you combine that with the deliberate practice of setting intentions, it's amazing what can happen. So as we wrap things up, I think the big takeaway here is that a dedicated journal for intention setting, especially one that's thoughtfully designed like the Listallion, it's so much more than just a notebook.
Yeah.
It's a tool for creating the life you want. It's about clarity, focus, growth. It's about taking those dreams and making them a reality. And the Listallion, with its beautiful cover and that high-quality paper, it's like a physical representation of that commitment to yourself.
I totally agree. It's about making intention setting and reflection a part of your everyday life, and having a journal that makes that process enjoyable and inspiring is key.
So for everyone listening out there, I want you to think about this for a minute. What's one small intention you can set for yourself today? And how might writing it down in a journal, maybe even a journal like the Listallion, how might that simple act change your focus and your actions starting right now? Maybe exploring the features of a journal like Listallion is the perfect next step on your journey to a more intentional and fulfilling life.
A great idea. I think we all have something we can work towards.
Thanks for joining me for another deep dive. It's always a pleasure.
Same here. Until next time.